everyone, to the 18th annual MIT Sloan CIO Symposium and the first digital edition. This is episode 4, Rapid Shift in Talent and Knowledge Acquisition. So for questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You may chat amongst yourselves, but we won't be monitoring chat for questions. If you use social media, use the hashtag MITCIO and join the conversation in the community. Post to the 2021 Symposium program under the topic Digital Innovation. So today we have a great panel with moderator Abbie Lundberg. She is a business technology analyst, author, and professional speaker. She is also an MIT CIO Leadership Award judge since 2017 and editor-in-chief of CIO Magazine for 13 years. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. Please join me in welcoming Abbie Lundberg.
Alan, thank you so much. So I hope you all get to see the sessions last week on the future of work. They were really terrific, and it was a great setup for this panel today. As technology evolves and businesses continue to transform, the degree of change that companies face in the skills they need and the capabilities they need, that's really made talent acquisition and development a strategic priority. Now, in this panel, we'll cover 3 themes under that broad umbrella. We'll start with acquiring the best talent for these changing times. We'll then talk about developing the talent you already have within your organization. And then finally, we'll finish up with creating a hybrid workplace that really works. So to make this panel as relevant to you in the audience as possible, we will take questions as we go along. So as Alan mentioned, please enter them into the Q&A panel as you think of them. Our panelists today are both exceptional CIOs. Mojgan Lefebvre is Executive Vice President and Chief Technology and Operations Officer at Travelers, one of the largest insurance companies in the United States. In this role, Mojgan is responsible for technology, data, analytics, and digital, as well as underwriting and insurance operations related to customer service and customer interactions. Prior to joining Travelers, Mojgan was the SVP and CIO of Global Risk Solutions at Liberty Mutual Insurance. Claus Jensen is Chief Digital Officer and Chief Technology Officer at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, the oldest and largest private cancer center in the world. He leads the departments of information systems, health informatics, and data products, as well as other core components of MSK's information technology ecosystem. Prior to joining MSK, Claus served as CTO and head of architecture at CVS Health and Aetna. So welcome, Mojgan and Claus. I am delighted to spend time with you both. Before we get into the topic itself, let's just set a little bit of context for the audience. If you could just tell us in a very short sketch, what are the main challenges or opportunities your company as a business faces today, especially in regards to talent? And how does that factor into your priorities for the year ahead? Mojgan, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Abbie, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. So it's interesting that you laid out the 3 elements of the conference and what we're talking about. So Abbie, I joined Travelers in 2018, and in 2019, we modernized our technology strategy aligned to our business strategy, which is focused on advancing our risk expertise, providing great experiences, and driving productivity and efficiency, really keeping up with the forces of change. And I'd say one of the key areas we're focused on is talent and investing in our people. And there are really 3 areas. One is recruiting, so the war for talent. And I'd say, while perhaps it slowed down a little bit as part of the pandemic and we were able to take advantage of that, it has absolutely started back up again. The second one is learning and upskilling, in a world where things continue to change, technology just changes at a speed that you can't keep up with it, ensuring that you've got a mechanism to make sure that knowledge that your employees have the ability to continue to upskill and learn what they need to do. And then I'd say last, but certainly not least, it's the employee experience, whether it's in today's remote world or, as hybrid comes into being, what that looks like. Those are the 3 things that we're focused on. And I say there are a lot of questions and uncertainty out there.
Absolutely. Claus, how about at Memorial Sloan Kettering?
It's an interesting world we live in. I think that's where I want to start. Right? There's changing expectations. You have changing expectations, as Mojgan talked about it, from the employees. There's changing expectations for the people that we're helping as a technology organization. There are changing expectations from the perspective of the people that we serve on the outside. And these expectations are changing at the same time that the art of the possible is changing very rapidly. So if we were to characterize the environment we now live in, it's the fusion between, call it digital science. I know that's not the thing, but let's just use the term. It's the fusion of digital science and whatever industry-related science that constitutes what you normally think of as the mainstay of your organization. What we haven't figured out how to answer yet is how do you actually fuse the two in a meaningful fashion? You can build hybrid experiences. And what does that do to not just your need for talent, but also your need for talent to work together in different ways?
Absolutely. Great. So great setup for the first topic, which is acquiring talent. So in terms of the talent that you need and how you actually find them and bring them in, you both work in extremely data-rich industries. Mojgan, what impact is that having on your talent needs within IT?
Oh, look, we're a 165-year-old insurance company where I would say data has been the core to the success of our business. We don't manufacture anything. Every decision we make as it relates to risk, and this has been the case for years, is based on data. Now, what has changed now is that it's not just risk expertise that we're focused on anymore, segmentation, pricing, and things like that. That experience, and Claus talked about it. He said expectations. It's like the digital natives have set the expectations for everyone, whether it's our customers or our agents. They expect the same from us, and so we're leveraging, and we need to leverage data and technology to address those experiences, and then really use it in every facet of our business and our functions. So whether it's our early severity predictor modeling that has enabled us to use it to really predict who might have opioid addiction based on the fact that they've got chronic pains. We've used it on 65,000 injured employees, enabling $150 million in savings. Or it's the fact that we're really driving towards asking far fewer questions when you're asking for a quote, and really making sure that we're up there along with the insurtechs and they have the ability to compete with them. So that certainly puts a pressure on who we're looking for and how we're bringing talent into our organization. I'd say the focus on data and data engineering, the focus on engineering as a whole, the ability to, whether you're building the solutions or you're integrating them, ensure that you can actually do it in a way where you're exposing the functionality and the data through APIs. So really a far deeper, I would say, set of skill sets around engineering, and then as well a focus on machine learning and AI. These are some of the areas that we're really focusing on, and we know that we're not the only ones. Regarding what industry you're in, these are the areas that everybody's really clamoring toward recruiting for.
And you mentioned when we spoke before, or when you did your opening, that recruiting is really ramping up. And when we spoke before, you mentioned a big number. Like, how many engineers and data scientists and people with those skills are you looking for right now?
Look, it's in the hundreds. I'll say, Abbie. So and there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out last year, and so it's literally in the hundreds. And the reason is we're really focused on building that capability in our employee set, the ability of our employees not only to understand engineering, but to also really intimately understand our business, to work in the cross-functional teams where we're driving towards collaborating as teams that are set up in agile and product modes, and so are far more persistent in what they're building. I think all of that is resulting in us saying we need to have far more of that internal capability and be less dependent on our vendors. We'll still continue to have strategic vendor partnerships, but we want to be selective and really make sure we're focused on where we can create competitive advantage. We've got our own employees focused on doing that work.
So it's not just the deep dive into data skills, but also it's thinking about data in a different way for how your business operates. And that goes well beyond IT. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. So Klaus, how much of your focus is on recruiting for and developing technical skills versus other skills, and why is that?
Where are you exactly?
Well, historically, most people hiring engineering talent would look at what is the documented set of skills you have. I don't think that's the right question anymore. I think the more interesting question is, what's your mindset? How do you think about a problem? And we talk about the next normal from the perspective of the business environment around us. Maybe it's time to consider the next normal for talent. We used to think about these soft skills. They were sort of the secondary things that we also want. I flipped it. So these are the first questions we now ask. Do you have an affinity for learning? Are you curious? Do you work well with others? Are you willing to make innovation part of the day job? Are you comfortable delivering incremental value, but always be focused on actually delivering value, not just code? Technology is a means to an end. It's only the fusion of what your business needs, what your customers need, and what we can deliver as a technology team that you actually generate value. And it's hard because all these traditional recipes for how do you write job descriptions, what do you put in a job ad that you put out there on the internet, where we put it. What questions do your hiring managers actually ask? They're all used to asking for, well, can you tell me what you have done somewhere else? Is that the right question? It's the right question to ask, well, what can you do here were I to hire you? It's a different conversation.
So how do you determine mindset? Like what are some of the questions you ask, or what are the things that you look for when you're looking to hire somebody to get that mindset idea?
I might ask a question like, so if you were to give me one word that describes what is that special something that you bring to the team were I to hire you, what would that one word be? It's an interesting question to ask because people get really uncomfortable. Might ask them what you love to do, not what you're good at, but what you love to do. Instead of asking, what are you not so good at, might instead ask the question, what do you hate to do? Because that's getting at how you feel and how you react and how you interact. The last question I usually ask is, so what question should I have asked you, but I haven't asked it yet? The fascinating thing about that question is it forces people to think out of the box and basically tell me what I need to know that I somehow haven't teased out of them from the questions I've asked so far. So those are examples of how you can ask different kinds of questions that go to who are you rather than what have you done.
That's great. And if somebody just sort of says, no, you asked everything, that's also a sign.
That is also a sign because it basically tells you that they've checked the boxes, but they're not necessarily the kind of person that will look for an innovative approach to a problem, because then they would have picked up the gauntlet and given me a different answer than you asked all the questions.
Right. So Mojgan, you've recently changed your approach to recruiting and hiring. Tell us what you're doing now and what was it that made you make that change?
So the scale we talked about certainly required that we, dramatically reduce the time that it would take us to fill positions. And then, to some extent, changing the makeup of what our talent is made up of. And in our case, maybe it's a little bit different from what Klaus is saying. I absolutely agree that understanding the behavior and who people are is absolutely critical. And so we've got the behavioral interviews for that. And we position those as, I think of them as case interviews. So defining a situation and then asking the individual how they would address it. And I think as they talk through that really says a lot. And the more specific they are, the more you can learn from that. But we absolutely also introduced a far more technical element into our interviews, because I firmly believe that, that engineering capability is something that you can bring if you're looking for experienced hires. And then you can certainly build on it and you need to continue to evolve it. So standardizing how we do the interviewing so that we're doing apple-to-apple comparison was one thing that we wanted to do. And then having teams that are really focused on recruiting. So we recruit some of our deepest engineers into teams that are the interviewing teams. And sometimes as a hiring manager, you may actually not even have met someone who's joining you. And we were really, I would say, taking a page out of the book of some of the larger companies that do recruiting really well. And we wanted to make sure we had the ability to, first of all, continue to improve the quality of the people joining us, bringing that open mindset, and having the ability to maintain the things that are important to us in our culture, and yet evolving it as much as possible, and increasing our technical acumen as we're doing it. We've dramatically reduced the time to fill the positions, and our acceptance rate for our offers has gone up in a big way, which is really the only way we could start to satisfy the numbers that we're looking for.
Great. And Claus, you talked about having been able to increase the decision speed of hiring. Why is that so important? And what did you do to enable that?
First of all, it's important because, and Mojgan talked about it, people have options. You shouldn't necessarily assume that it's hard for someone to get another job. It's generally not for the good engineers. So they don't have the patience to wait for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. They also don't have the patience to show up for 10 different interviews. Mm-hmm. So you got to be careful with how you're going to set up the interview process and what will it take for you to make a decision. One of the things we did is we basically cut down on the number of interviews, not on the breadth of topics we're trying to cover, but this idea that you go through this gamut of, one interview after another, after another, after another. It no longer really works. We tighten up the processes in terms of how do we get from, yes, we're interested in this candidate, delivering an offer. So that basically means being better prepared, having a better understanding of where's the market at, what kinds of things would be attractive. And one of the things we did was that we hammered out a individual contributor career ladder that goes higher than it historically did. We actually completed the matrix separation of people that have people management, traditional managerial responsibility from people that have technical leadership responsibility. That wasn't always the case. If you look at the digital natives and many of the old technology companies, I used to work for one a long time ago, they've always had the separation of job responsibility between people management and technical leadership. But many of the more traditional companies have not. If you actually demonstrate a clear understanding of the fact that individual contributors can go as high as, a pretty senior leadership position, but on an individual career ladder, and you shape the market around it, and you are crisp and deliberate in how you communicate that in terms of what you're looking for and what these candidates can expect, I do think you can actually increase the acceptance rate. And I totally agree that's important because you spend a lot of resources on this. But I also think that you can speed up the decision process.
Cool. So we have a couple of questions from the audience around sort of your strategic planning for your workforce. And one is, given talent shortages combined with rapid change, what are your strategic approaches to what skills you hire, what skills do you build, what do you rent, and what do you outsource? So how do you think about those different buckets of talent?
I think the short version is buy, quote unquote, what accelerates you. We're not shy of going out and doing partnerships with people that have resources. It accelerates something we have to do, but build what differentiates you. It's a phrase that we often use about business solutions and software, but it kind of applies to talent as well. If this is a talent that's differentiating to your organization, you should own it. You should have it in-house. If it's something that's a matter of scale and acceleration, I'm very comfortable sourcing that from a third party.
Yeah.
Mojgan?
Yeah, and so, we certainly want to be very deliberate about what we build, what we buy as a package software, where we partner potentially even with insurtechs, where, in the past, people might have said, well, they're going to be taking business away from us. We've got examples of whether through acquisition or through investments like companies like Carpe Data or others that we've actually really kind of invested with them. And so it's very similar to Claude, but one other dimension is really thinking about it as systems of record and systems of engagement. And so really the systems of engagement, I would say, is where you want to have your own stamp on it much more. We're not going to go and build an HR system. There are some of the best systems out there. And so we will absolutely buy. And then same for skill sets, as Claus is saying. Again, our goal is to have internal engineers so that we can continue to really, where value-added work is being done, it's our employees. Where things are more repetitive, it can either be outsourced or, over time, leverage machine learning and AI to do some of those things.
So So there's a question from John. What kind of partnerships have you developed or do you need to develop with the academic community to support your talent recruitment and retention strategy?
Well, we have a few key strategic universities that we focus on. Again, it should be fewer numbers, but probably more strategic, deeper relationships. And then we've got some research relationships that we have with a couple of universities, whether it's focused again on some of the more emerging technologies, and then certainly some of it being with universities that are close to us. So, for example, one of our bigger areas where we've got our talent is Hartford, Connecticut, and we've got a deep relationship with the University of Connecticut, and we're in the process of expanding our the work that we do with them. We do a lot of work with them around geospatial capabilities, and we're now considering other areas of AI to be working with them.
Great. So let's move on to the next section, developing talent. Because in addition to hiring for new skills and capabilities, you also need to reskill and upskill. And you mentioned this, Mojgan, the people that you already have on your teams. Claus, what does talent development mean to you? And what's the role of your first line managers in developing the talent on their teams?
It's a great question. There's this phrase in healthcare, which is make sure that people operate at the top of their license. That's actually the answer to the first part of your question. Right? I mean, the role of talent development is to make sure that people operate at the top of their capability. That will change over time. I mean, people are at different points in time in their career, but if you're not making sure that they're maximizing their potential and you're letting them leverage that in the environment you're in, you're actually not effectively giving them the opportunities you should. You're probably going to have retention issues, and you're also not going to get as much value out of the talent you do have as you would like to get. That's something that we spend a lot of time discussing with the first line managers, because they're really the ones that have on a day-to-day basis judge what is this person ready for. And it's different from just filling a role position. And one of the things it requires is willingness to give up people, some of the best people on your team, if they're ready to move on. That's far. Most first-line managers think first and foremost that's why they have the job that they do on their team. We need to help each other say, well, actually from the perspective of the greater organization, you do need to inject mobility. My senior leaders and myself are sponsoring talent mobility and talent development programs across the board. We spent a lot of time talking about that. We actually have an integrated approach. We're working with the HR team, in fact, the various parts of the HR team, and we do quarterly integrated planning for what is the talent development plan for the next quarter. And we have line of sight to what that looks like as a 12-month roadmap. So we take talent development quite seriously, and we try to run it as professionally as we would run any other initiative. It's just one that never ends because talent development is a journey.
Well, I just one follow-up on that. I think that point you made about mobility of talent is really important to retention. Do you offer incentives to your managers to make sure that they are providing their people with opportunities that may take them away from their team?
It kind of depends on what you mean by incentives. Incentives as in cherishing opportunity and rewarding people for being willing to take risk, yes. Incentives in terms of rewarding, first-line managers to let their people go somewhere else, I'd say that's expected. So it's a two-sided coin, right? You reward talent for being mobile, but you expect from the larger organization, at least I do, that we will all help people become the best possible talent that they can be, as I said, operate at the top of the license. So it's a two-sided coin. You have to establish the norms, traditions, cultures, values, etc., that make it normal to move around. And you have to recognize talent that is diverse and has the ability to move around and make a difference.
Great. Mojgan, you mentioned upskilling. What are some of the things that you're doing to reskill and upskill your team?
So I think about that in a couple of ways. For the folks who are in the technology organization that currently have some technical skills, we're focusing on, we're aligning the strategy for learning to what our technology strategy is. So we've got a lot of work that's focused on going to the cloud, driving towards infrastructure as code, making sure our applications are built, in as granular a way as possible, isolated by APIs. So there's a lot of training that we have. We're leveraging, great external training that exists, and then where necessary for us to customize it to our world and to our business, we certainly do that as well. We firmly believe in, people having to be kind of as full stack and multilingual as possible, and that extends both, across technology and the business. I've got the fortune of also having our insurance operations team with us. And so the ability to actually really kind of cross-pollinate and cross-learn exists, especially as we've driven again towards these small cross-functional agile teams. I think that opportunity is there quite a bit. A couple of other things that we're doing is focusing some of our sprints, throughout the program increments that we have on innovation and learning. So really focusing the teams to learn and then apply it in the work that they're doing. And then the last one is we are just getting ready to do the graduation from one of our boot camps that we put in place for some of our non-technical people, so some of our operations folks, to actually learn software development. So this is our first pilot. It's been a 6-month boot camp. We picked some of our best of the best who really wanted to learn technology, and they come in with really understanding different parts of our business, and we think they're going to make either fantastic product managers or actually also going into the software engineering field. So these are some of the things we're doing, Abbie, but we're continuing to partner with our HR organization and thinking through how can we scale some of these things.
So was that part of the thinking in your sort of dual role of leading the IT organization, but also the operations part as well?
Yeah, so certainly, I certainly have a focus on trying to bring the two groups together and leverage the fact that I lead both organizations. So that certainly helped quite a bit. But I'd say, I think of myself and my role as, probably having to be the champion for digital and technology across the enterprise as well. And in many conversations with our CEO, I know that, that's certainly a vision that he has, and making sure that all of us have the right skills. And I'd say in today's world, every single one of us has to have some level of technical capability and acumen.
Claus, is that part of your responsibility as well, that you're helping the rest of the organization within MSK to sort of up their technical knowledge and literacy to be able to take advantage of the technology in an application kind of way?
I think in a very real and tangible fashion, part of our role is to be the chief storyteller. We've got all kinds of C-level titles, chief digital, chief technology, chief information. It's really about telling a different story. You need to somehow weave together the purpose of the organization you work for, the strategic objectives, what's happening on the ground, and tell a story of the art of the possible that resonates with not just the minds of the organization, but the hearts. If you can talk to the heart of the organization, you can actually shape values, thought patterns, mindsets, etc., much more powerfully. There's some research out there. I'd pick up odd tidbits of research. Right? So apparently, a good story impacts how people think 22 times more than any amount of fact does. Isn't that fascinating?
Yes. And it's been really fascinating to see how storytelling has become such a big part of business. There's a lot of storytelling experts to train within IT, but also other parts of the business, how to tell good stories. So one of the things that we always hear about having a culture of continuous learning, and certainly that's really important today. The World Economic Forum's Future Jobs Report says that automation will displace 85 million jobs by 2025, but at the same time, create 97 million new ones. I mean, those numbers are really mind-boggling. So there really is this need for continuous learning. We've touched on it a little bit, but I'm curious to know, Claus, so what does a culture of continuous learning look like, and what does it take to create that?
I think at the most fundamental level, a culture of continuous learning starts with the realization that anything you think you know is going to be outdated 1 year from now, 2 years from now, etc. If you don't actually feel at a very emotional level that you will not be at the top tier of whatever it is you're trying to do if you stand still, I don't think you can get there. Right? So how do you sit down and tell people that it doesn't actually matter how good you are, how smart you are, how much you know at this point in time? Because if you don't continue to change, then you won't be in the top tier anymore. That's a tough conversation, because you have people that have made careers off of doing certain things and being the best at that. And now you're telling them that that way of working, that discipline, is not going to be relevant in a 2 to 3 year time frame. First and foremost, you have to give them something else. You have to show them a path that demonstrates. But who you are, how you think, and the experience you have is still very, very relevant, but as relevant as we take this journey to go somewhere else. The one thing I told my team when I had my very first town hall, it was back in the later part of 2019, before the pandemic. It was a different world. But in my very first town hall, I said, we can't tell you where this journey ends.
Yeah.
And I'll never be able to tell you where the journey ends, because this is a journey, it's not a destination. So I only ask you for one thing: jump with me into the breach and head out on that journey.
That's great. And overcoming that fear that I've invested so much in becoming who I am professionally to be able to sort of show them the path forward, and that, this doesn't mean you're less valuable. That's a really important message. So thank you for that. Mojgan, from a practical perspective, so we've got the mindset that's really important, but we also need the tools and the programs and the approaches to be able to enable people to learn anytime and anywhere. So what are some of the things that you're doing to do that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did was putting in place kind of a platform so that through a digital experience, you could have the content kind of coming at you, and then based on your role and what your interests are, and actually kind of the content that you take, that recommend something. So think of it as kind of like Amazon or Netflix. So again, leveraging kind of some of the great technologies that's out there, and then ensuring that we had people who are actually really focused on creating some pathways that were the areas that we're interested in. So whether it's for our data science pathway or our software engineering pathway, really making sure that there are some people who are curating and ensuring that this doesn't get stale and is available. And luckily, it's actually played quite a big role as we've got into the pandemic, of course, with everything, not the inability to do anything physically. So having this platform has gone a long way. We've also kind of made sure that we have strengthened some of our partnerships where we're leveraging our partnership with Amazon Web Services, for example, in some of their learning capabilities, and bringing those to our employees. And then I would say, lastly, ensuring that we've got forums, whether it's, calling them cloud parties or really getting our teams together, or the InJam Innovation Hackathon that we do on an annual basis. Incredibly enough, we had the largest number of participants this year. Just the fact that you had the ability to do it fully remotely, and you could participate from anywhere and be on anyone's team, regardless of what the geography was. Now, we know that when we go back, we certainly won't be in this fully remote situation. And so how do we maintain some of the great things that we've learned during the pandemic, and some of the, doing everything from anywhere, and yet having the ability to also have some of the in-person experiences that I think can't be replaced with any one of these tools.
Yeah, it's been such a tremendous, that's been one positive side to the experience that everybody's been through, is we've been able to get an opportunity to see what works well and what doesn't. It's a great question from Fred here. Given all the priorities in a company and within an IT organizations, how do you ensure that people have time for training? And that's for either of you.
Yeah, so one of them was really embedding it into, again, so we have program increments. We've got 12-week program increments that the teams work, and dedicating, literally giving the teams permission to dedicate one of those sprints to innovation and test and learn. I think some of it absolutely goes back to what Claus was saying, where it's got to be part of the culture. And so one of the things that we're trying to truly drive and promote through our organization is, test and learn, and that it's okay. And if you're doing it in small increments, and as you learn, it's okay, for something, if it doesn't work, call it fail or whatever, but that to acknowledge that. And then the one thing that we've certainly focused on is not only to fail and learn from it yourself, but then to share that widely, because that's really the only way that you can get that learning through. So those are just, some of the things that we're doing to ensure that we're promoting it. One of our teams, by the way, for the past 4 years, has dedicated every Friday afternoon to innovation. And some of the work that's come out of that time is just incredible and has been the core of some of the solutions that we have, whether it's our wildfire detector AI solution that has won awards. So it's really staying true to it, and then making sure you're not not only penalizing people, but really rewarding them for the learning.
Yeah, that was well said. I mean, I think it starts with making learning part of the day job. If you consider it something sitting on the side, if you don't have it be part of whatever mechanism you're using to plan out the work, if you don't make it expected, you're not going to find the time for learning. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard people say, but I don't have time. I'm almost like, you don't have time not to. Because if you don't, then at some point in time, you're just not going to be up to the level of performance that we would expect from you. I do think there's an element here of people needing to take ownership of their own learning journey. I fundamentally believe that. You can't force people to learn. Every individual in the organization needs to take ownership of their own learning journey and in some ways of their own career. We're going to help them. As we both talked about, we're going to give them tools. We're going to give them freedom to go do different things. But they have to want it. It's a choice. You have to take ownership of your own learning journey.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So moving into our third and final section of this panel, we know most organizations will adopt some form of a hybrid workplace. It's going to be a blend of in-person and virtual work, but nobody really knows what that looks like yet. And it's just really fascinating to see how people are going about, sort of trying new things and seeing what works. But to me, it seems like it's going to be a pretty complicated thing to kind of work through. So what will your version, as much as you can anticipate it today based on your experiences, what will your version of the hybrid workplace look like? And what will it take to make that work? And neither one of you can jump on that.
It's going to be multidimensional. I mean, people think about it as if it's one thing. It's not. We both have diverse responsibilities and teams that do very different things. The team I have, which is critically important to the institution, that does clinical coding. It sits somewhere in the boundary between clinical operations and digital operations. If you don't do that well, then you're not actually going to be able to generate the bills. And if you don't generate the bills, you won't get paid. If you don't get paid, bad things happen. That team is largely a group of people that can operate individually. They know what the job is, highly complex. So it's certainly a knowledge worker kind of job, but it's not one that requires a lot of co-creation with other people. Very comfortable having that team be totally remote. They will come in when it's appropriate, either to socialize or to participate in events. But they don't have to be in a semi-permanent structured co-creation kind of setting with other teams. I'll give you a counterexample. I've got about 500 people that are running the scaled agile trains. This is my team that creates and optimizes everything we do. It's a co-creative effort. It's highly based on product management, design thinking, the complex engineering that goes into it. And it's got tentacles and interdependencies all over the place. Having those people work individually remote, we already know it's not working. I mean, there's a reason that people adopted Agile and that we've always said that some amount of co-location in an Agile environment for the team is important, especially as we're hiring a lot of new people. They don't have the affinity or the experience to work with each other. So it's a multidimensional question, because on the one dimension is what's your actual role and how amenable is that to fully remote versus fully on-premise. I don't think I have anyone that has to be, fully in the office. But I do have a large group of people that have to not just be in the office part of the time, but they have to be in the office at the same time, because otherwise you won't get the co-creation effect. The last thing you want is to have a creative conversation where 75% of the team is sitting in the room and 25% is on video, because you might have all done the entire thing on video. So what we did very early on, it was actually August last year, we said for the most critical teams that are co-creating and that are fundamental to our entire transformation roadmap, they're in the office Wednesday and Thursday. What they do Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, it's up to them. They can organize that at the team level, but everybody is in the office in the same location, Wednesdays and Thursdays. And that's likely going to be the model we're going to choose, whether it's Wednesday or Thursday, or Monday or Tuesday, it doesn't matter. But 1 or 2 days a week where everybody that's co-creating together are actually in the same location at the same time. That's, I think, a practical hybrid of this notion of co-location, which comes with agile and continuous delivery, but at the same time respecting, it doesn't have to be 100%.
Mojgan, are you thinking about it in a similar fashion?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, although it looks like Claus is a bit more advanced in kind of like having decided some of the specifics, which is fantastic. I may leverage some of what I learned from what you said. I think the challenge that we have is even prior to the pandemic, our teams weren't co-located. So so we usually would have teams at least across a couple of locations, and so I think this is complicated. I think we're gonna learn a lot. It's really hard kind of sitting remotely and trying to envision what the future is going to look like. Certainly like every other company, we're trying to decide, how do we provide flexibility and yet make sure that the teams that, need to be together when they need to be together, and whether it's to innovate, to create or something, they have the ability to be so, because I truly do believe that that's got to be done. There's an element of in-person, because even my college student daughters, think that the best way to do some of the work is to meet with their people. Like even the most digital young people think that being in person makes a difference. And then I'd say the expectations of your teams is going to drive a lot of the scheduling. So I agree, when you've got the product manager and the team members having an expectation of, if they're all getting together in one place, then that's got to happen for the whole team. We're trying to land on like whether it's 1 or 2 days. We do want to have an enterprise kind of standard on what's acceptable, because there's just a feeling of equity that's going to be asked. And yet from that, we've got to take that and then apply it to the specific role. I have to tell you, I still have a lot of questions in terms of what we're going to do once the enterprise decision is made. And, I'm one of the members of the team that's working on that. But it's not obvious to me, because I see a lot of benefits coming from, remote, having the ability to be remote. We actually hired some people who are in locations that are not close to the office. And yet, if you allow them to do that, then what about your current team members who say, well, why wouldn't I have the ability to do the same thing? So I think there's still a lot of questions to be answered.
And that's why I said it seems like it's a very complex issue to work through, because on the one hand, you get the team. What does the team need? Then you have, what does the entire department that you're working in need? And so it's different for different groups. You're talking about the enterprise is going to have some standards and process. So my question is, what is the sort of coordinating mechanism that you're using to make sure that all things, and there's a fourth one, it's the employees themselves, right? So, employees have different needs and different desires for, maybe being in at home sometimes, being in the office sometimes, and are you factoring that into your equation? And then how does that all get coordinated?
So I mean, we will factor that to some extent, but we also want to make sure it's clear that it's not going to just be whenever anyone decides, because I think that, at the end of the day, we're working toward business outcomes, and we're here because our company exists and needs to be viable. Having said that, we certainly also know that, we're, again, the war for talent that we talked about is there, and people have choice. So trying to balance that is a key thing. We have a core team, and we've been working on it, across both our executive leadership and a few key team people, taking all of those things into account, thinking about everything from what our policies are to what's the technology that we need in order to enable this hybrid environment to really the change management that it's going to take. And regardless of what we do, how do we make sure that our leaders and our managers really have all the tools that they need to ensure that the employees are as engaged as possible? So it's a whole program, Abbie, that we're working on. And once we announce it, it's going to be about how we roll it out, and we're going to take an iterative approach and learn from it and adjust as needed. It is complicated. My understanding is there's a Stanford professor, Nick Bloom, who's really done a lot of survey in this area. And if you ask employees, generally they'll say they'd love to work 50% at home and 50% in the office. If you ask companies, they'll say we'd like people to be one day remote and be in the office. The reality is, I think we're all going to end up somewhere in between, right? All the announcements you see, it seems to be 1 or 2 or 3 days remote at most. So we'll see where we go. But I think, again, at the core of it, it's ensuring that the employees have the flexibility they need, and yet, the business outcome you're driving towards is achieved as well.
I mean, managing expectations, and you talked very eloquently about it, is very hard. It's not just the expectation as to how many days, it's also which days. You can agree on 50-50, but there's a big difference between whether, from a business perspective, I can say, these are the days I expect you to be here, versus, no, you get to choose when you come in. Because this entire free fall and people get to choose individually rather than trying to get some kind of structure around the team, I don't think that's going to work. What makes the expectations very difficult to manage is everybody read the papers. Google said everybody can work from home. Netflix said people have sent me these newspaper, clips. But this organization does what these articles don't say is the small print. All these organizations, small print was for those who can.
Yeah. That's
not what the newspaper articles said, but it was always, if you like what they actually said, it was for those who can. It was always a negotiation in terms of, Mojgan, what is the art of the possible inside the desires of the individual versus the needs of the business. I do think there's an angle you didn't call out, Abbie, which is we have to rethink the space. Mm-hmm. Because if we actually focus on co-creation and collaboration when people are on site, then you got to rethink the space in terms of what is the collaborative tools, facilities, etc., that you put in place so the experience is different. It actually feels like this is a space that is conducive to the purpose for us being in the same room at the same time. You're just sitting in cubicles and there's no space around you to go work together, or not enough of it. Then again, it's pointless. That's not to say that you never do individual work those days, but their main purpose, at least for me, is to go work together as a team. So you got to give them facilities to do that. So we're rethinking actively the space as we speak. Once we start bringing people back, hopefully it'll be to different space.
So that seems like another important partnership. There's the partnership between IT and HR as we talk about hiring and learning and all of that, but there's also the partnership between IT and facilities management and operations and all of that as well. Do you foresee a time when the technology will be good enough to create an environment, to create the kind of digital space that will enable those agile teams to work and collaborate together? Or will there always be that need for them to get together in person?
Well, I mean, look, if this pandemic had happened even 10 years ago, I'd say it would be even harder than it has been, right? And there's so much that we've had from Zoom and Teams and this and that just have made it far more feasible and possible, and companies are continuing to thrive. Who knows what's going to happen with, I would say, augmented reality, virtual reality, but there is nothing that will replace that the ability to really feel someone when you're in their presence. That just doesn't come through, especially as numbers get a little bigger, right? So I was on a Zoom meeting with 20 folks yesterday. I mean, I couldn't see all of the facial expressions. You don't know when someone's really getting ready. And actually in Zoom meetings, a lot of times you see that people kind of talk over each other. So who knows? I'm sure that we're probably underestimating, 10 years from now, what the technology is going to look like the Bill Gates saying, right? Underestimating what's going to happen in 10 years, but probably overestimating what can happen in the next year or two. So I'd say there's still a ways to go. And having said that, there are so many more capabilities that we have today with everything that's at our fingertips. And who would have thought that, the MIT Sloan kind of CIO symposium would be done fully remotely, and it's incredible. So, hey, who knows? I don't know. Claus, what do you think?
I agree with you. I mean, adding onto where you left off, there's a certain rigor that gets enforced in current generation technology. And I don't think we have line of sight over the next couple of years on how to take it out. There's a rigor in taking our turn in talking. You can't have a multifaceted conversation over Zoom. You can in a room. Yeah, you got breakout rooms, but again, those need to be organized. So there's a formalism and a rigor that gets introduced. If you want to try to do the same things you can do in a room, it is not as spontaneous ad hoc. It can't be. There is a formalism in needing to agree that this is the link we're all going to follow, and we're going to be there from 11 to 12. I'm not saying things can't go over, but it will be rare that people come in half an hour early and start doing things that happens in person. This wasn't scheduled. I'm just going to go grab A, B, and C, and we'll go have a conversation. Not impossible, but harder to do in a virtual interaction. So the formalism gets a little bit in the way for a free-flowing conversation. It's hard to take out, no matter how smart the technology. I agree with Mojgan. The technology got a lot better, but that enforced formalism of structure and interaction model still exists. And then I love how you started. It's about the emotional connection. I'm not saying we will never be at a point where you can create an emotional connection via virtual media. I mean, my young adult daughters have friends that they've never met in person, and they are real friends. But can you recreate that kind of emotional connection in a work setting? I don't think we know. With the current generation technology, my answer is no. But the technology might have 2 to 5 years from now, who knows?
So there's a great question from Pragati about that, following on to what you've just said, and this question of equity and equal opportunity. So the question is, how do you help hybrid workforce get equal opportunities to make meaningful relationships with their managers, with their mentors, with coworkers at work? And I think, also sort of to that point of, when you have a group of people who are in a room, you can more easily pick up on, who's being quiet, who isn't engaging, versus how do you create that equity when some are there and some aren't? So can you talk about that a little bit?
I'm going to be positive, a little bit politically incorrect. Right? We can give people equal opportunity irrespective of what work model they're in, but we can't actually give them 100% equity, because there is a difference in whether you're in the room or not. So unless we're willing to insist that everybody is virtual all the time, and some companies might go in that direction, it's not actually possible to give people 100% equity as long as at least the two of us believe that. We're at the point where the technology is not a substitute for being in the room. So we probably have to face them, that we can give people equal opportunity, and we should absolutely not penalize them for not being in person. But we can't give them equity because they cannot be part of the interaction the same way as if they were in the room.
So yes, so Claus, maybe you're referring to like the meeting after the meeting, right? Like once you have stopped the video conference or so on. And you're right, like unless you explicitly go out of your way and say, okay, no more conversations really allowed, like you're going to miss out on that. That is one of the kind of things that people talk about, the fact that, well, if I'm not there, like how are you going to make sure that I don't miss out on those conversations? I mean, you'd have to go out of your way. I think the one thing we're going to be better at is ensuring that there's always the video conference is also always part of that meeting invite. That wasn't always the case. So I think there are some things that we've learned, which we can certainly continue. And I think, our tools have become better. Hopefully our practices have become better. But there is an element of in-person that will create that inequity. That's true. At the same time, I'd say sometimes, because I think the question was saying, how do you ensure that, you get that same equity online? Some of our employees say, well, online we have more equity than when things were in person, because they did feel, those who weren't, where meetings were happening physically, say they really sometimes couldn't hear people, or they really weren't part of the conversation. And so are there ways that we can take what we've learned and try to at least bring some of that back as we go into that hybrid model?
I love the way, go ahead, Claus.
I was just going to say, David threw in that some things are easier to coordinate if you aren't actually in the same room. It may even be easier if you have a very large group. I actually agree with that. But I still don't think that gets us to equity. That was why I made the distinction between equal opportunity and 100% equity. It's just not practical to strive for that. You got to give people equal opportunity, but you can't make everyone the same, because that becomes the least common denominator. People do interact in different ways, and what works for some people doesn't work for others.
Yeah. So we've just got a couple of minutes left. So in our last few minutes, if you think about the experience that we've all been through over the past year with the pandemic, could you name just one or two things that came out of the pandemic that surprised you when it comes to talent acquisition and development?
I would say we're incredibly proud, and I'm surprised at the level of engagement that we've been able to maintain with our employees. Like, never would I have thought that we can be 100% remote, for over a year, and yet get better levels of engagement. But I'd say we're probably depleting the well that comes from, because again, I think that human connection and is the basis and the foundation, and a lot of relationships exist. So for me, that's like one positive surprise, and that would be the one I would point out.
The tenacity and perseverance that everybody has shown in the face of a rather adverse environment, people's ability to step up on a dime to things that we didn't know we had to do, and totally agree, it's been amazing. But I also agree that we're getting to the end of the rope. I mean, people are tired. One of the things we're talking about now is we have to get back to not being in crisis mode. In fact, I made it a theme for Q1 and said, okay, it's 2021. How are we going to get out of crisis mode? Because running around with stress hormones in our bodies for more than a year is not healthy. So it's been amazing what people have stepped up to, and I agree with Mojgan, probably more than we could ever have expected. But if they keep doing it, we're going to get to the end of that road, and that can't happen. So is that
part of your transition planning? Thinking about it, I see a lot more people talking about wellness and well-being, and getting people. How do you get people out of that, fight or flight stress mode into what is, now becoming sort of a cliche of the next normal?
Certainly part of our plans. I mean, I put it on the table explicitly and said, let's sit down and talk about how we get out of crisis mode. I won't say we're there yet, because there's still a lot of stress and churn in the environment around us, but we're getting better. We're trying to stick to the plan for 80% commitment, and if you achieve more, it's a good thing. We compensated to some degree for the loss of cohesion in the teams by just working longer. And that's not sustainable. Yeah. So we have to set new expectations in terms of what does a reasonable workday actually look like. That's both more flexible, but also doesn't burn you out.
Yeah, I mean, and we've had a focus on well-being and wellness, and again, certainly something that we're all conscious of, and I agree that whether it's working from home or living at work, which is what everybody has said. I mean, that has changed our lives, and that has impacted us a lot. And we're trying to really be focused on that. I mean, we've even had sessions among my senior leadership team where we brought some experts who focus on mindfulness, and we've spent a little bit of time on that. And as uncomfortable as it has felt, that it was something that at the end of the session, we all said, this was a good thing that we did, but there's a lot more to be done. And I personally am certainly looking back to having the ability to go back and interact with humans far beyond just my immediate family.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mojgan and Claus, for sharing your immense experience and your insights with us today. And thank you to all of you in the audience for your great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to to answer them all. There were some really interesting things in there, and hopefully we can cover them in the discussion on Thursday. So, Alan, back to you.
Well, thank you to three chief storytellers, Abbie, Claus, and Mojgan. That was a very interesting discussion, and I've taken a lot of notes. To the audience, I hope you continue the conversation. Please post your thoughts to the 2021 Symposium program under the topic Digital Innovation. And join us tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. We will have an open discussion. I will be co-hosting with Christopher Reichart, and all of you will get a chance to speak yourself, your thoughts on the panels this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And yes, replays will be posted to the 2021 Symposium agenda. And that's it for now. Bye-bye.